Welcome, wrestling fans. You've seen a lot of videos on the internet, and usually it's a lot of these nerds talking about, oh, John Cena sucks, and look how many wrestling DVDs I have, and TNA this and TNA that. We're the Wrestling Roundtable. We're here to dispel some myths you might have, to open your eyes, give you some new perspective, hopefully some opinions and insight you haven't had before. And joining me on the panel today, to my left, which would be your right, is Lawrence Haber, a fan of 21 years. He's a professional musician and instructor whose work has been featured in independent promotions. To my right, that would be your left, is Rodney LeConte. He's been a fan of 19 years. He's a New York film student and MTV employee. I'm your host, Eric Santamaria. I've been a fan of 19 years. I'm a videographer, and I've worked in wrestling for a while now. And our first show here is going to start off with a very controversial topic. That would be,
to say the least.
Yeah. That would be Chris Benoit and what is his legacy. Now, to preface this, all three of us were huge Chris Benoit fans. All the way back to WCW, we were very passionate about this guy, much like the internet was. He's the best worker and he's held down and this and that. Any jokes we might make, let's just say it's like the clown. We laugh so that we may not cry. It's such an absurd situation, sometimes you can't help but make a joke about it. Although I can't think of anything funnier than the media reporting that Benoit killed his kid with crossface.
They called him the Canadian cripple for a reason.
That was pretty funny. But what we'd like to do is talk about Chris Benoit and what his legacy is. How is he going to affect wrestling perhaps for years to come? And the first thing we want to talk about is, how do you see, as we just mentioned, wrestling being affected by his murders, if at all?
Obviously in a negative way. I mean, pro wrestling has always been the bottom of the barrel, bottom of the ladder in the entertainment world. I mean, no matter what kind of ratings, no matter what kind of publicity, people are always going to see wrestling in a negative light because, just everything that's been happening. And with these murders, it kind of gives people a reason to justify why pro wrestling is lame, is, too scripted and everything, and how these guys are just steroid freaks who like to fight each other and bash each other with chairs. I mean, it's taken its toll, and it really made people look at the wrestlers and the wrestling schedule in a different light. These guys don't have seasons. They don't have many days off. They're away from their families the whole time. And that, it's going to mess with their head a little bit. And, putting your body through the punishment that they do night in and night out. And it just makes you look at how the scheduling could change. So we could stop seeing our heroes dying. You don't have baseball fans every year or so they expect another two of their favorite baseball players to die. It doesn't happen in the end of the sport. In wrestling, it sucks because we're like almost immune to it now with these deaths.
I have to agree with Rod. As far as the media goes, probably it's going to just take what's already perceived as a very low form of entertainment and going to give it an even more horrible name, I guess is the best way to put it. But the baseball analogy is interesting because if we talk about how it's going to affect wrestling in terms of the wrestling universe, I don't think it affects it really at all. I think people are going to cry for a while and they'll always remember it. But in a lot of ways, it's no different than any other overdose, even though there was murder involved, and it was the murder of someone's family, which, if I, being in the business I'm in, if one of my colleagues lived the same lifestyle as me and overdosed on drugs or something, I might reconsider, having a drink or something. But it's so much different when they kill their own family and it's perceived as that being related to wrestling somehow. It makes you question what you're doing. But wrestling seems to be a unique animal like that, and I don't think wrestlers are necessarily like that because it's fraternity. To get in is so difficult, and once you're in, it's like at any cost, by any means necessary.
Especially
to make
now,
it.
it's a very close circle.
Right, but to get back what I was going to say about baseball, baseball's not going to change at all with the recent Barry Bonds perjury accusation and the report. I think Senator Congressman Mitchell or something about all the names of all these baseball players that supposedly bought steroids are going to be outed, and apparently there's going to be some wrestlers on this list too. It doesn't change baseball. And baseball makes a lot more money. So why would it change wrestling?
Well, I have an article about that right here in front of me from the Asbury Park Press here in New Jersey.
Oh, do you?
Yes.
Oh, some
Like-
fine arts right there.
Well, you like to point out how Benoit was never a big star outside of wrestling, like a mainstream star like
Yes.
Austin or Hogan.
Yeah.
But there he is on the cover of People magazine.
Yup.
It's giving wrestling all this exposure it never
Yeah.
got before. And
The
this,
wrong kind of exposure.
well, this article
Not
is
that
about
it matters.
that. It's
and
about
publicist is good. Any press is good press, so to speak.
in
you know?
McMahon's mind,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Well,
obviously that's
yeah,
proving to be
okay,
not true.
Fair enough.
McMahon
But-
planned it.
But this article talks about that, about how the Congress is going to have a session about steroids in sports, wrestling, baseball, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, okay.
This isn't the exposure McMahon sort of wanted. He didn't want this sort of mainstream
Well, it's a witch
attention.
hunt. Basically, it's going to be a public dissection of wrestling.
This article by Steve Feitel says that wrestling has no union, no benefits, this schedule, beating each other night in, night
Stuff
out,
that we-
and
Yeah.
all this stuff that we and wrestling fans know. But all of a sudden, this is a surprise to someone here, and he says, "Why isn't there change? Why isn't the Congress do something about it?" I don't see anything happening.
Can I interject?
I don't
Mike?
see wrestling really changing. Go ahead.
Well, and you know why? And this is sad. The three of us all totally agree on this.
We've seen it before.
But from this is from this article is coming from an outside perspective. Will wrestling change as far as the outside goes? It's not going to change as far as the inside goes. I think we're all pretty aware of that. That's probably the better
Yeah.
question to ask among wrestling fans, because if the fans don't want it to
We've
change,
seen the drug testing come and go.
Of course, but
many
the
times.
fans don't care either, because the fans will turn on Raw the next week or
Right.
Impact or whatever. But as far as this writer goes, here's a writer who, like you said, is almost surprised by it.
Right.
So he didn't even start to do the digging because there's so much stuff that the mainstream
doesn't know
doesn't
half of
even know. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
I mean, but
Oh, yeah.
Benoit
A
is
lot of
only
stuff we don't
scratching
even
the
know.
surface, because if people found out the reason why Benoit was a star among fans, it's because we always thought he wasn't the typical steroid user guy. Like if they actually got into that, or like when Jericho was on Larry King, if Larry King had asked, "Why did you leave wrestling in the first place?" to Jericho, which we know the real answer, he couldn't deal with it anymore, couldn't live with that lifestyle, then it opens up Pandora's box, and they don't even realize that yet. You know,
Well, Larry King's the safe one to go to. That's why they go on.
yeah.
I mean, he's asking questions like in 2007, does the audience know it's fake? Of course they
Oh,
do, unless
man.
you're 4.
Is it really?
Stanford, you're on the air.
Well, I was actually reading an interview with Rob Van Dam where he pointed out something I didn't even think about before. After Benoit's brain scan came back of all this damage to his brain cells,
Yeah.
Van Dam said that pilots have a certain limit that they can fly, a certain amount of time they can spend in
Right.
the air,
Yeah.
whereas wrestlers
They
are
get
getting
tired.
their heads slammed every night of the week
Every
almost
night.
and flying all
Well,
the
look
time.
at the NFL.
What sort of effect is that going to have on them?
Yeah, I mean, look at the NFL. These guys are getting, laid out every week, getting concussions, and a lot of them play hurt and lie about it because they don't want to lose their spot. But
Sounds familiar.
if it affects the team and the image, the NFL will interject because, I mean, recently, like we had this guy, Sean Taylor, got killed last week. The
Yeah.
NFL has not done a good job recently with taking care of their players as far as their image goes, but they always make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen to the best of their ability. Whereas Vince McMahon could really care less,
Yeah.
it seems.
He
You know?
as long as he can get his product out there, then
Yeah.
more
The
people
image-
would watch. Yeah.
He's already resigned
That's what I
himself.
feel.
Good one. He's already resigned himself to the idea that people are going to hate him, so he's going to use it to fuel that.
broaden his product.
To
out.
play devil's advocate before we go to our first break, McMahon has sent a lot of people to rehab.
Yeah, but why does it have to take a suicide and 2 deaths for him to do that? It should have been done a long time
Because he's a
ago.
promoter and he wants to make money. And we need to take our first break. So stay tuned and we'll be back with more discussion about Chris Benoit and his influence on wrestling. Posthumous! Welcome back here to Wrestling Fan Roundtable. We're talking about He Who We Do Not Speak Of and his legacy on wrestling. Now, we talked about it in a grand scale, sort of like an industry business sense.
Yeah.
But what about the actual in-ring product? Do you see, because he was a huge influence on a lot of wrestlers in their in-ring style.
Oh, yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you see them changing
Ryan
that
Danielson.
in any sort of way?
No, I don't think so.
You're pretty
I
adamant
don't-
about that. Wow. Bad.
I don't see anything that the wrestlers do. I don't see them shortening the amount of bumps these wrestlers take. I mean, basically the only thing in the past years, the only action I can think of is maybe Owen Hart dropping Austin on his head and then banning pile drivers.
Yeah,
for a
but they've
while.
also banned the shooting star press, those sort of moves that Paul London and
You know
those
what
sort of
though?
guys would
The
do.
Austin thing, they probably did that because they realized, holy crap, we could lose our
Their
top star, and it
Exactly.
affects you in the pocket.
Yeah, but
and it's a different
but
thing,
they didn't
you know?
start.
It's a
That,
month-
they didn't ban it until like a year or two
Yeah,
after.
Okay,
after,
alright.
a year or two after. Maybe they'll.
Well, I'll tell you this
Think
much.
about it.
I think it's hilarious that a few years ago, you may remember, and this is around the Angle Brock sort of time, when they had this
Agreed.
implement of we want to tell more stories in the ring, like mat-based stories,
Mat-based,
as opposed to this
SmackDown
high-flying
6.
hardcore stuff. You know, it's a bunch of bullshit when then in the next breath they add the Money in the Bank match to WrestleMania every year.
Yeah, well,
Hell in a Cell,
WWF
everybody.
has never been all about the high flying stuff. I mean, not as much. I think WCW did that a lot better than WWF. You know, showcasing that kind of style. WWF is more the big man, you know, slow matches, Batista, Undertaker,
Historically,
WrestleMania
yeah.
main event. Yeah, because of
Larger than life.
with Hogan, larger than life characters. I don't see style changing.
I'll put it this way, and this is a real indictment of wrestlers. Only if it's by design. I don't think wrestlers would ever proactively change what they do. They want to take as much punishment, to be the freak, to be the guy that everyone remembers took the big bump that night. or
End of
did
the
the
day,
big-
it's still
even the
business.
women, you know. I mean, I saw a girl on Monday night. I can't remember who it was. Jillian, I think
Oh.
she did a shooting star press. On.
She
I was
did,
like,
huh?
Yeah, I
Landed
think
on-
what-
They
and I
finally
was
let her
like-
do it?
And I was like, but she's probably been
She did a
itching.
450 and
She's
landed on
prob- maybe
Malia.
it was a
Now it's a
450. I can't even
450.
remember.
I'm
'Cause
shocked
I
they
do
finally
remember
gave
what
in and
happened
let her
every
do
week.
it.
Yeah,
Ricky
it was
Steamboat
good.
must have had a rough week.
Yeah, it must have been the 450 then. But I kind of find it funny and comical that everybody's talking drugs. It's because of the drugs and that's part of it, obviously painkillers and all that. But we all know that if this was related to brain damage in some way, it really goes more to the in-ring style
Sure.
that created this monster.
Well, we're talking about a guy who had neck surgery and
Yeah,
continued to
but
do this.
right. That would never happen
Yeah.
in any other field, any sport or anything. If
Someone
you-
tears an ACL in football and they're
yeah,
done.
they're done. I mean, what's his face? Joe Theismann broke his leg. He didn't rehab and come back. I mean, he had a horrible fracture. But you break your neck, and not to mention concussions and knees and all these
still
things.
taking
But
hard
to break
hits,
your
hard
neck,
hits.
to break your neck and be back in a little over a year, sometimes less than to break your neck, you know, and be back, and not just be back, but be back doing the same things you were doing, sometimes worse.
Except no neck bridges.
That's crazy, you know.
What you just said about Benoit,
That's just-
and if you trace it back to his influence, the man he modeled himself after, Dynamite Kid, I think it's pretty apparent
Wheelchair
that
bound now.
if you want to be like Dynamite Kid, you're gonna get fucked up.
Oh,
Dynamite Kid's in England with like a pin sticking out of his foot. He can't walk. He's in a wheelchair,
oh,
and we know he was doing
one too many needles.
horse steroids and all these sort of drugs.
The smaller you are in the height, the bigger you want to be in width. I think that's
Oh,
what
it
really
doesn't
got
matter
in
what
bed
you,
was.
you know, I mean, Big
Head.
Show was on steroids probably too. You know, you gotta get that physique. You need the definition.
Yeah, when you're on live TV every Monday night,
Unless you can train the fans to expect something else and kind of.
I don't. The fans have been trained.
But can
The
they be
fans have been
retrained into liking? I'm not even talking about style. Forget about the matches themselves. I'm talking just about that physique thing. You know, can you get the fans to the Dusty Rhodes,
Jeff Hardy.
Jeff Hardy?
Party.
Should Benoit be inducted in the Hall of Fame?
No.
The whole
Really?
thing.
Yeah. No. When you put yourself, you know, in the situation, what if Nancy Benoit was your cousin or your sister, and then you hear, oh, the company that WWF or whatever, the company that hired your sisters or whatever's murderer, they're gonna, you know, put him on a pedestal, induct him in the Hall of Fame. People go fucking apeshit. But then again, from other side of the fence, because of what he brought to the business and
I don't even agree with that.
what what he left the fans with, I think a quick mention, honorable mention, 10 plus years from now, when it's dissolved in the fans' minds, I think that would be appropriate.
You think this psychotic murderer shouldn't be put in the Hall of Fame?
Of course not. It's absurd. Well, first of all, we got to get through all that stuff about, you know, the Hall of Fame's a work and Bruno Sammartino and
Right,
Macho
right,
Man
right.
aren't in it. But again, assuming it's like the Baseball Hall of Fame and it's legitimate, of course not, because the mark, the gash is so deep. You couldn't do it in front of an audience. It'd have to be some sort of weird video package during a special, so that's kind of awkward. People would boo coming back from that commercial break or leave the room. People would protest it. What you do outside the ring, I mean, everyone in the Hall of Fame has demons. When Austin goes in, he's a wife beater. Hogan, you know, obviously not the most natural physique. Snuka, you said, killed somebody. And Lord knows a laundry list of crimes and rapes and drug use.
Yeah, right.
Probably worse than Sing Sing. But when we get back, I want to talk about his legacy despite the murders.
Well, we can't because we're going to move on to something else when we get back. We're going to be talking about where Chris Benoit came from in terms of being a star, that being WCW. It's a real shame because we all know, without question, before the murders, he was on set like
That's another set. Murders, that was just one.
He was set to be in the Hall of Fame like that, no question. Just based on what he contributed to wrestling before the horrible end, in spite of the already horrible name that wrestling got even worse after him. If it was me, I'd have it just be like a blurb on their website at the bottom in small print. I wouldn't have any sort of presentation.
Why
for
even
it
do
at
it
all.
then? You know.
It's something you can't advertise.
The point is, it's supposed to be like, we appreciate you. You know. So you can't appreciate it.
I think he's an important figure in wrestling before the murders. But
Hall of Fame's supposed to be an accolade.
when we get back from our next break, we're going to be talking about WCW. All right, welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable, and we were just talking about someone who became a big star in WCW, and now we're going to talk a little bit about WCW towards the end in and of itself. To my mind, there were three things, and a lot of people people have written books about what led to the downfall of WCW.
Yeah.
In my mind, it's three key things. Obviously, the most important and the final nail in their coffin was Jamie Kellner at TBS saying no more wrestling on Turner Networks. That was it. Two other factors to me: the merger with AOL Time Warner obviously set the snowball into motion way back in the mid-90s.
Kind of tangible.
And the other thing is a lot of people, and WCW's reputation is that it didn't make stars, which we were big WCW
Wait,
fans.
Eric, you don't think the finger poke of doom put WCW out of business? Like all those smart people on
Ah, come on.
Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan, they really did it. They killed the whole... Yeah, right.
That's the biggest bunch of bullshit. WCW did make a lot of stars. We know that. We look at guys like Lance Storm, who came up in ECW. A lot of people think ECW. Bullshit. Lance Storm was a much bigger star in WCW.
Yeah, they really pushed him over the top.
And a lot of the guys that ended up in WWF probably only ended up there because they were stars in WCW first. Benoit, Guerrero, Jericho, Giant, etc., etc.
Well, yeah.
But I think it only goes to a certain level where I think 98 is a real key year in wrestling history. That was the time to start pushing these guys from the mid-card, where they were stars like Jericho, to the next level, up to the place where the Hogans and the Savages and the Flairs, Bretts, those guys, all the old guys were dancing around on pay-per-view main events forever when the mid-card was going crazy for Dean Malenko and Booker T, those sort of guys.
Yeah.
And when they missed that opportunity in that year, it was kind of all downhill from there because by the time guys like Scott Steiner and Booker T and Jarrett were given that spot, the fans had already left.
Are you kind of trying to say that Steiner and Booker T were only stars in WCW land?
To a
because
point.
WCW land was such a small pond.
No.
At that
No,
time
it was a
didn't-
big pond. That's a big
No, I'm
pond.
talking about that
Big
at like
pond.
2000, 99.
Oh, in 2000, sure.
In other words, it didn't matter that they were big stars. It was too
Yes.
late.
I'll give you an
In
example.
other words, it doesn't really count like DDP or Goldberg counts.
Yeah.
Because it was too late.
I'll give you an example.
I agree with
When Russo came in, he started pushing Bret Hart and Benoit and those sort of guys, Jarrett, into the main event spot where they never were before.
In WCW, right.
Yeah, in late 99.
Yeah.
When Russo got the boot in January, Kevin Sullivan comes back in and starts throwing Luger and Flair and Hogan in those same spots, totally undoing the work.
I just think a star is a star. You know, the WWF brought Booker T and Steiner in, and Page, who I mentioned already, and those guys got huge star pops from the WWF fans because they were stars. And Booker T was made, so to speak, during the period after 98, when things were too far gone, which I never thought they were. It was too far gone when they said no more TV. Now, they weren't competing with WWF, but they were a viable business. How do I know this? Because TNA's on the air still.
TNA's the only thing left. I will disagree.
If you got TV, you got a TV show, you got a business.
Well, to make
On TV,
Lawrence's
you got a
point
business.
for him, to compare rating-wise,
Yeah.
TNA isn't even doing half
Of
of what
course.
Nitro was doing
Yeah,
in the last
Nitro was
TNA's not even
success.
beating ECW.
Nitro was a
Right.
success. Nitro got killed by the huge salaries and guaranteed
They were losing a lot of
contracts.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were losing money because
Because they still depended on those big names that were made
They could
years
have
ago.
never competed with the WWF, but still been a very successful business in their own right.
I think that, the stars like Booker T, Dean Malenko, all the mid-card guys that Evan wanted to see main event, they should have had him in the main event a lot earlier, so that way when the stars, the Hogan, Savages, when they do, leave and Nashes and
Yeah, they
Halls,
could elevate those guys.
yeah,
obviously.
but because it was so obvious, I think even to the casual fans, that because these guys were on top, is because
The other
all the
gone.
other stars were gone.
Yeah.
So it was a little
That's a
hard
good
to
point.
buy Jeff Jarrett,
So in other
main
words,
eventing and everything.
if they had put over,
If they put Booker T over Hogan,
then it counts.
Then it
yeah.
counts,
yeah.
So
Then
if
you
it's
say,
just
this
like
guy's a
they're-
star.
that's a great point. So in other words, if they're just gone and now these are the stars.
these
Hello.
are the stars.
The
Yeah, but
leftovers.
there were people that were stars that those guys got elevated over to. Booker T and Jarrett really didn't get to beat anyone.
For every Goldberg beating Hogan in '98, there
There's
should have
a-
been 5 more.
They
Of
should have been
course,
5
yeah.
more. Everyone
But they did
wanted
make-
to see
I mean-
DDP do the same thing.
I
I
don't
love
wanna
WCW
argue.
as much as you do, but they were losing a lot of money, having a hard time
but
getting
it's-
And by that
fans to
time-
buy
like
tickets.
Conan was a pretty huge star for them. Like
He was,
Road Dogg
but
or
they
something.
didn't go-
Yeah, but they didn't. But he was still a huge star. So I don't know if that's necessarily. If you have to go over somebody to be a star, Goldberg never beat anybody, and he was a star before he beat any of the guys.
No,
he
they
was a
went.
huge star before he beat Hogan.
When Goldberg, the way they groomed Goldberg, the reason why I think, or me as a fan, because you
Or is he
never
just an
saw.
exception, I don't
Yeah,
know.
he was, this big, huge
Jericho
guy, and
never
see
beat
him
him,
running
but-
through people
Yeah.
in a matter of minutes, having these minute matches. That's something as a wrestling fan you never saw before.
He was a star before he pinned Raven and
Oh, yeah.
Hogan. So
He
that kind
was.
of goes against
yeah,
your
but
point. You don't have to beat anyone to be a
they
star.
groomed him in a unique way, so he didn't have to. So he didn't
so
have
about
to beat
Conan,
those.
people had Conan. Right?
But he-
okay,
but
can,
they knew
can I
he
make
was
an
on his
interesting
way.
point? Maybe you don't have to beat guys. Maybe you just have to be with them, rubbing elbows. Once Conan was in that group with Sting and Luger and Nash, it was like, oh, so Conan's one of these
Nah,
guys.
I don't think that's good.
I think the fans perceived him. Well, obviously,
I mean,
know, to make
how
him
big
champ.
of a star would
to make
Austin
him
be if
champ.
he never beat Shawn Michaels, and if Austin still to this day never won a world title?
Oh, he's another exception. People loved him, man.
Yeah,
He
but,
didn't even
then
belt.
again,
he was a star since
what's-
he was in there, McMahon. You know,
Let's
And
look at
he was a star when he was in there with
McMahon, just the
Brett.
fact that McMahon wanted
lost
the
to
belt
Brett.
off.
He lost to Brett.
But that made him a
can
star.
we
And
make
Brett's
a compromise?
main event.
You don't necessarily have to beat the guy, but you have like Austin didn't beat Brett.
Never
he
did,
was
but-
made a star in having that match on that stage. If Malenko, who maybe Saturn's a better example because he was kind of on his way, had fought. I don't know, not necessarily like Luger or something, and had a decent pay-per-view match with a decent build-up at a pretty big show like Super Brawl or something. Even if he kind of lost, just the idea that he was in a feud with that guy and not a one-out Thunder match. Like tonight, it's Dean Malenko and Chris Benoit versus Rick Steiner and Sid, and they're gonna get killed. If he had something that was looked and perceived as being legitimate, whether he lost or not, that might have been an opportunity to make a star.
Well, let's
because they
look
made
at-
Austin a star without having.
Let's
to
look
beat
at it
Brett.
this way. I think it's a matter of not pulling the trigger because Shelton Benjamin did the same thing in 2004. When he
Yeah.
went over on Raw, beat Triple H, they had the opportunity there to continue with it.
Exactly.
And bring him to the next level and just...
And they stopped at Orton. When he beat Flair at the next pay-per-view, all right? So then he's like, all right, so he's groomed for his Intercontinental title run. And then he loses to Orton, and I think from there it's just been
Yeah, they
downhill.
undid it.
They undid it. And just imagine if Austin, if he didn't beat Shawn at WrestleMania 14 and he's still chasing the title, I think his stardom would have dropped a little bit because they're like, the
No.
fans would know that, all right, this is enough. He needs to win the world title now.
Austin was out injured, and the fans were going to the show just to be
Because he
impressed.
was doing, unique things.
They kept
he
him in the
was
mix.
he was feuding with the owner of the company,
Okay, no,
which
he
no
was
one
in
else
the mix.
was.
Yeah, so, but
But then
nothing
again,
to do with the match. Nothing to do with
I
the
think
match.
it's really conditional.
Just a feud.
I don't mean that every single person had to beat Hogan for the belt. I
Yeah.
just mean that they need to be put in prominent positions.
They don't have to
like
beat the
that.
guy necessarily, though.
Right.
As long as they're considered
there
on
and
that
put on
level.
a great match
Yeah.
because Austin
Fair
and
enough.
Brett, because Austin was made a star
So-
because that was such a great match, and because of the double turn and how that went.
Because Booker never had that opportunity. Because he was a TV champ and never actually got to beat a Scott
the night he
Hall
won the
or
belt,
Luger
the night he won the belt in
He beat
Bash at the
Jarrett,
Beach 2000.
you know?
If they hadn't done the angle where Hogan and Jarrett and all that crap, what if it was just Booker and Hogan?
Then
Booker
it
going
would-
over would have been pretty big.
It would have been very big. It would have been very big.
Yeah, probably would have been much. The whole thing would have been much more memorable, and who knows? Yeah, the what ifs in wrestling.
Well, maybe we'll talk about some more what ifs when we come back from our break. Stay tuned, more Wrestling Roundtable when we come back. Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable, and obviously, this being our first show, the comments and opinions haven't come up yet, but I can already see people posting, what about ECW? ECW made all these guys stars. Can we just say that's a big bunch of bullshit right now?
I
Only
wouldn't say
if one of
bullshit.
the fat kids at his staring at his webcam.
Don't get me wrong.
agrees with
There
that.
were a lot of guys who made their name in ECW or had a rebirth in ECW.
Oh, yeah.
They had great runs. But Eric Bischoff, and I think correctly, always likes to point out that ECW was destined to be a niche, regional, small product. Just
That
by
was
its
their
very
whole
nature.
thing. That was,
It is
that was its
because
premise.
when it went
We're-
on
we're-
CNN, it failed miserably on a bigger scale.
Right.
And me personally, I would rather see them in the ECW arena than the big lit up shows at the convention hall.
Well, outside of...
It's punk rock. You're not punk rock anymore once you're in the mainstream.
I
Once
can
you
think-
have a network TV deal.
I can think of only a handful of guys who were bigger stars in ECW as opposed to like WCW or WWF. Like Sandman.
Taz.
Well, I guess
Taz.
he was much better in ECW. I'll
Yeah.
give you that. Who do you think was the biggest potential star that WCW missed out on? Maybe a guy.
WCW?
Yeah, that they let slip through their fingers.
Eddie Guerrero, by far. Oh, man.
But well, the numbers prove you right. So.
Well, not even the numbers.
Yeah.
Just like, I mean, I always say, man, what if they realized what they had at Conan at the time and Eddie and put them together as like Los Guerreros with the Lowriders or something like that, the people would have went
Well, we saw
nuts.
like
They would
Havoc.
have went nuts.
We saw like
Yeah.
Havoc '99.
Even the LWO was kind of hot.
LWO
you know?
was hot.
We
They
saw
were this
Hot
crazy.
at the time.
we saw at Havoc '99 like the seeds of lie, cheat, and steal. I mean, it was his
Yeah.
shirt, cheat to win.
When he tightened his game up, when he tightened that whole thing up and he figured out how to use the stereotype and also be like accessible to the mainstream fans, he had that stuff down better than Benoit ever had his shtick or Jericho. Because Jericho's stuff is so quirky and ridiculous. Even going back, like it's not nearly as funny and a lot of it's just
I think his
stupid.
WCW stuff is great.
It's some of
It-
it, but
it
going
was.
back, it's kind of like, wow, this guy wasn't nearly as cool.
I think his WWF stuff.
But Eddie
sucks.
just has such it factor.
It just
you know, it's
got
there's-
stale really fast.
I mean, I appreciate Eddie so much more now that he's passed away. You
Yeah.
really realize how really great a performer this guy was, not as a wrestler even, just as like a personality. You just want to hug him and be like, I love this guy. Eddie sucks. Eddie
Just
sucks
so- yeah.
always, no matter what he did.
Just imagine,
Jericho
you know,
would kill to provoke a reaction like that.
with Guerrero,
Jericho
you know,
would kill.
how the fans reacted when he beat Brock for the belt. Just imagine
Oh.
if 99, if he's, or 99, if he's frog splashing Kevin Nash on pay-per-view. and
LWO,
beat the-
NWO war
I got
culminates.
the
Yeah,
perfect top of my
how
answer.
crazy it would
Oh.
be. And the pay-per-view with him
I got a
winning the
great
belt.
comparison. You know, the other two guys everybody would probably say are Benoit and Jericho. Most of the crowd, it was almost contrived. Like, yes. But when Eddie won, the fans were like, yes,
Yeah.
Eddie, we love
He won.
Eddie, because he's in the crowd. And it wasn't, you know, it wasn't the same thing. Eddie was somebody the fans legitimately had a connection with on some level, whereas Benoit was like, we respect him as well, yes.
Which
So-
star of WCW's do you think that them leaving WCW had the most impact?
I think Big Show was a big loss. This was like a WCW star from day one when he walked in. He was beating Hogan and stuff. And it was like one of their guys. And it just made this perception like, you go to the WWF if you want to be a real star. Because I think even me as a WCW like fan, root for WCW at that time, because everybody had their side.
Hogan told him to go.
Yeah, even like it's like, geez, like this is like a guy that WCW is more than happy to put the belt on and push. And
In his
has-
first match.
Yeah,
But you know,
and he's
I
leaving
feel
because he
towards
wants
the
to
end they
make
didn't know
it.
what to do with him. How many times did he join the NWO? I don't know.
yeah, but-
they didn't know what to do with him towards the
You
end.
have the next Andre the Giant.
That
When we
happened with a
watch,
lot of people,
when we
though.
watch these old
The
night
Giant,
shows,
who more than the Giant was on and off for the NWO. They would kick out and then he'd
of
join.
course they ruin him.
I mean, they had him come to ring smoking cigarettes.
But
that
when
right there, I was like, they don't know what to do with this guy.
Yeah.
When we
They don't
watch
know what to
those
do with
old
this guy.
nitros on 24/7, and we see the Giant and the pops that he's getting next to Sting in 96, 97, he was over.
He was super
People
over.
had the giant T-shirt. He came out the energy level. The people would get up and just go nuts for him, beating up all these 10 guys at once.
He
And,
did drop kicks.
I mean, you got Andre the
jumped over the
Giant
ropes.
level, like
Size.
size, but also the people did perceive him as the next Andre. It wasn't like these other slugs like El Gigante and Khali. They really looked at him like this is the heir to Andre because you put him with Hogan right away, and you know.
I know a lot of
You
people,
missed out on the next Andre the Giant.
I know a lot of people are probably going to be saying Jericho. I really don't think Jericho matters that much in the long term at all.
No, not at all. And I was
I
a big
think
Jericho fan too.
If they lost anybody, WCW to WWF, and it was a big deal, I think it was. I don't know if you want to group all the radicals together,
I don't
but
agree.
definitely Benoit and Guerrero.
Guerrero, yes,
I
Benoit,
agree with
no.
you.
Out of all those four
I
guys,
agree with
Guerrero's
you on
gonna win
that.
that.
Benoit more than Guerrero at the time, I think.
At the time.
But he was a WCW guy, and it was his time.
Oh, it hurt at the time. It definitely hurt us.
it was like their entire mid card left.
yeah, that's what it felt like.
It was. But, you know, when they gave him the belt, it was almost as if they said, here, give the belt to stay.
But
That's what it was.
It was.
Oh,
And
totally.
we
That's
saw
literally
that
what
through
we
it.
all- yeah,
It was a bunch of
that's kind
shit.
of common knowledge
Bunch of
thing.
shit. Like I
But
said, that should have happened a lot.
there's a lot of people that we don't even realize maybe even had a bigger impact, like Raven. I mean, look at TNA came
Imagine
so
if Raven
close.
was
to
Raven was the main event.
Raisin?
Imagine Raisin.
in the California.
And you know they'll say Raisin's just one of those old guys.
Raisin.
Out of that group of guys, the biggest star they could have had in, let's say, like that Magic Time year in '98, I think it would be Big Papa Pump.
Big Papa
Yeah.
Pump could have been
Scott
a
Steiner
mega
could have
star.
exploded
Yeah.
if he had just been at that level a couple years before.
Yeah,
Well, not
I
literally,
think so
but-
too. I really think so too.
Oh yeah.
Instead, he
Steiner's up
like
there,
putted
man.
around the whole year with like some non-feud.
Him and
with-
Bagwell.
Yeah,
Coming
feuding
out
with
in
Bagwell,
Mark
and
McGuire's
you know,
jersey.
feuding with Rick Steiner, and he had a very, very short feud with Goldberg.
These
at
are
the
the
time.
largest
What do you guys say to our potential critics here who will say, well, WCW made all those guys, I'm sorry, that ECW made all those guys that WCW brought in, like the Luchadors.
The hell was
and
Jericho?
Then maybe they
WCW.
introduced the fans to them and
It
brought
was
out the
just
best of
another
their
place
abilities.
they wrestled. It was just another place
Exactly.
they wrestled. You kidding me? WCW took notice of them because they said, "Oh, let's take this guy." Because they used to rate everybody. They would sign any.
They took
signed
him and put him on the grand stage.
WCW signed 911. I don't know if they signed him, but I mean, if Bischoff had the net and could raid the talent anywhere, he's in ECW. Let's take him. That doesn't mean ECW made him a star. It means they allowed WCW to take notice. It
I
was
mean, yeah,
just
they did
a
fuck
forum.
up with the same.
Well, look at the group that came in around
Right.
that time in like 95, 96. You got Benoit, Guerrero, Malenko, Jericho, the Luchadors,
Public Enemy.
Mysterio, Public Enemy,
Mysterio.
Conan.
Put him on paper.
Those sort of
First
guys
match.
all became much bigger stars and more
Was a Mysterio's
Totally.
first match on paper?
more well-rounded packages
Mysterio
was a
after
total
coming into
WCW star.
WCW.
I think one of the biggest ones was Bam Bam Bigelow. The way he
Totally.
came in, looking for Goldberg, you're like, holy shit, Bam Bam. And I mean, ECW did. I
That
think, a
is
better
because
job
he did rebuild his character in
in
ECW.
ECW. I think way better than WWF.
Oh, God.
Put him. Yeah,
With
I
the
mean, they made him a
flamethrower
monster.
suit.
You know, welcome to the jungle. You know, it came out. It was very
Yeah,
intense.
He was badass. And
Now,
He was
I
badass.
try
It was
being
cool.
I try being a positive person.
Yeah, Van's the man.
But
God,
when
what
it-
people are dead? Ben
when
was
it-
dead. Bigelow's dead.
Oh,
Oh, my
when it
God.
comes-
Public Enemy's dead.
When it comes to wrestling, I'm
man.
very cynical.
That's sad.
And I think come next week, you fans are going to see why. Because all that stuff we're going to be talking about TNA next week. Love it, hate it. I know you guys do. But next week, we're going to be talking about TNA. And all this stuff that we went through with ECW, WCW, just as fans,
Yeah.
we've seen this play before.
Yeah.
And I have no patience for it anymore.
No, not at
But
all.
hopefully you'll have patience enough. We welcome questions and criticism and feedback. And we'll see you next week on the Wrestling Roundtable.